So welcome, everyone. This is after lunch, so hopefully for the next hour, I won't see people in the back sleeping. I'll try my best. Considering the topic is on calculations, right? So not everyone feels excited about it, but I do. So you're here for pick your poison, level of detail expressions, or table calcs, correct? Anyone in a wrong place? No? Brilliant. So I'm Mrinal Sridhar. I manage a team of system consultants based out of the London office, and I cover, well, our team covers Africa, Benelux, Middle East, and Nordics. As you can see, there's a nice little variety there, right? So we get to enjoy in 2 weeks nice summer weather in South Africa and freezing cold weather in the Norway. Okay, so keeps it exciting. So I thought for this session, let me think about a story that I can associate with, right? And here's the one that I could think of. So very recently I got married, right? And my wife, she's Czech. We got married in Prague. And they have a tradition in Prague. So once you get married, they bring out these two short glasses, okay? So one is vodka, another one's water, okay? And of course, being the gentleman, you allow the bride to go first, right? And if you get vodka, that means you're going to be the boss in the relationship, okay? If you get water, you know what your role is going to be, right? So of course, Annette went first. She got vodka. I got water. So why am I telling you this story? Well, if you think about it, I mean, in the end, nothing really changes, right? We're still married, right? Nothing really changes. But at the same time, you want to go for vodka, right? That's the right thing to do. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are many ways to one number in Tableau, okay? But it turns out not always are the best, okay? So what I'm trying to get to here is if I were to be in Tableau here, just a simple table based out of Superstore, right? All those numbers, so if you just focus on the top one, which is central region, consumer segment, you can see that they all have the same number, okay? 911,000 pounds. And they've all been derived from different methods, okay? So the first three that you see here, those are coming from level of detail expressions. This one is a simple aggregated measure, and this one is a table calc, right? So as I said, there are many ways to the same number. But see what happens, for instance, if I were to deselect some of those filters. Now the numbers change for all these guys in blue, but fixed sales, that number still stays the same, okay? So depending on what I pick, there are implications. And this is something that we're going to cover for the rest of the presentation today, okay? All right, so let's get back to the mode and look at our agenda. So how many of you over here would say that they are advanced users of Tableau? Not that many. How many of you would say you are beginners in Tableau? Okay, a good chunk. And how many of you are intermediate? Okay, so you did actually filter by level. Very good. All right, I'm still going to cover some basics. I think it's very important. Part of it is also because I'm going to use some vocabulary throughout the session. I want to make sure that we are all on the same page, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some basics. We're going to break into level of detail expressions and table calculations, spend some time in there. Filter order of operation, you wouldn't think about it, that it's related to calculations, but it actually is. We'll look into that, and then we'll look into some considerations around performance as well. All of the content that I'm going to present today, the PowerPoint deck, it's already there on SlideShare. So if you are fast and if you can grab that URL, brilliant. If not, you'll have to wait till we have the recording available. But I have posted this on SlideShare for you. Okay? So let's get going. And focus on some basics, right? So before you start building your calculation, it's very important that you know your data. What I mean by that is, if you do not know what makes every single row in your data set unique, or what is the row granularity of your data, you cannot build calculations because you would not know at what level you need to operate on. Okay? In other words, what is a row granularity? If I were to bring in every single dimension onto the canvas, okay, that's the row level granularity. Make sense? Okay. Now, some people might use the word granularity, some people might use the word aggregation. One and the same, it's just that they both behave in an opposite manner. Okay? So, if I were to just look at my raw data, that's the totally disaggregated form of my data. For example, in Superstore sales, if I were to just double click on sales and have sum of sales come up, that's the most aggregated form of my data. Okay? And then once I start introducing dimensions onto the canvas, what I'm doing is I'm making my data more granular, less aggregate. Does that make sense? Yeah? Pretty straightforward, right? In Tableau world, we call it the Viz LOD, visual level of detail, view level of detail, view LOD, whatever you want to call it. For today, we're going to stick to Viz LOD, all right? Now, once you understand the concepts, right, and how the whole level of detail works, let's focus on how to start framing your calculation question first of all. So how many of you over here, when you're creating calculation, open the calculation editor window and start typing your calculation right away? Very brave, very good. What I would advise though, there is a chance that you might make a mistake, okay? So what I'm going to ask is, before you do that, before you venture out and just open the calculation window, write down your question in just plain English, okay? There are some advantages to it. The reason is then you can start focusing on the nouns, adjectives, and verbs and start looking into what is available in your data versus what is not available in your data, right? Because it's just right there in front of you on paper. Also, you can spot some analytical grammar, right? So oftentimes, you might have used words like, pers, eaches, buys, and that's going to allow you to understand the level of detail at which you should be operating for your calculation. It's pretty straightforward, right? For some people, it works. Some people just don't need it because they're superhumans, and that's perfectly fine. But once you got this question written, what we're going to do today is introduce a framework, okay? So if there is one thing that I want you to take away from our session today, there are two frameworks that I'm going to present, okay? So those are the two frameworks I want you to take away, and once you get back to your work, I want you to use them and see how well they can work out for you, okay? So what I mean by that is, I've got one, which is called a dimensions framework. Essentially, what it does is, when you write down your question, and it talks about a dimension that you need for your analysis, and if you don't have it, how do you go about figuring it out? How should you derive that, right? So should you have maybe a set, or do you use a row level calculation, or a level of detail expression, right? This framework is going to allow you to get those dimensions, okay? I've got several examples, which we're going to run through, and you'll see exactly how that works. Another one is for measures, okay? Slightly bit longer than that. But again, with this framework, once we've written down the question, we're going to literally just run through this flow chart, right? And identify what is the right approach to get answer for that analytical question. Cool? So we'll get some opportunities to test that framework out today. So let's jump into level of detail expressions then. What is level of detail? So if you take a dimension and drop it into any one of those shelves or boxes, that's where you add to the level of detail. Or in other words, the Viz level of detail, okay? If you add a dimension to, let's say, tooltip or filters or pages, then you do not affect the level of detail. You with me so far? Okay? Now, the problem here is, Tableau aggregation automatically adjusts to your viz level of detail. Okay, so if I got my sum of sales and then I introduce states to it, guess what? My sum of sales is going to be broken down by states. Okay, then when I introduce city to it, it's going to be broken down by state and city. Right? So whatever that I introduce to the level of detail, accordingly, my calculation is going to change. But what if I want to keep it independent? So this is where the whole idea of, level of detail expression comes in, right? So as you can see, viz level of detail generally matches the data level of detail. But with level of detail expressions, what we get is a calculation which is independent to the viz level of detail. Does that make sense? Because I'm repeating level of detail 1,000 times, or LOD is the word 1,000 times. I find myself even confusing. Okay, so how does it work? So there are 3 types of level of detail expressions, as you may know. Fixed, include, and exclude. The fixed one is pretty simple. What it actually allows you to do is, regardless of whatever that you're building in your visual, it allows you to do your calculation at a different level of detail, right? So regardless of what viz you have, you can keep on reusing it in different manners, okay? So some of the advantages that you have with fixed level of detail is it could be a measure or a first-class dimension in Tableau world, right? So you can create your own dimension and reuse it across the whole workbook or your data source, okay? Now, there are implications to filtering with fixed level of detail. I'm actually going to go into that specific topic when we are talking about the order of operations. But one thing to remember on fixed is it's independent to the viz level of detail, okay? So let's look at an example. So here's the question, right? What I really want to do here is I want to get sales year over year by customer cohorts based on the first time I acquired a customer. Okay? So for example, in 2014, we might have acquired a certain number of customers, right? And now we want to see that over the course of years, how much they have spent with me. So the cohort of 2014, those customers, right? How much they spent in 2015, 2016, 2017. Okay? Now, this is not something that you're going to have, let's say, built in your database. I mean, depends on how much you have in your database, but not everyone has it modeled in their database, calling it the customer acquisition date, right? So before you want to get this answer, what you're going to do is either you're going to prep your data beforehand, or before LOD expressions, you would have applied some really crazy Jedi tricks with Table Calcs to get this answer, right? But with Tableau version 9 onwards, with the level of detail expressions, you can get this answers quite easily, okay? So let's run through this framework. What we need is customer acquisition date, okay? So this is what we're trying to achieve. So do we have that dimension? No, we don't. We only got order date. Okay, so now this new dimension, do I just need a subset of the order dates, or do I need all the order dates to determine this? Well, I actually need all of these. So red is when the answer is no, green is when the answer is yes, right? So we come down here to the third one, which is, does the dimension need to be derived at the row level? So what I'm asking is, do I need to grab these dates at every single row level? And the answer is yeah. I mean, I want to see like every single sales record. I want to see what that customer acquisition date is, right? So the answer to that one is, okay, create a level of detail expression then. Does that make sense? Yeah? So every single time, what we're going to do is we're just going to run through this simple exercise, right, to see what the end result is. So if I were to then get into Tableau and look at the customer cohorts, right, what we've done here is a simple calculation, and the simple calculation is fixed customer, do it at the customer level, find me the minimum order date, right? Meaning the first order date that they placed the order on, okay? That's it. Very simple. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go back to understanding how include works. Okay, so now this I would say is a very powerful use case of level of detail expressions. Okay, to do what include can do, we had to do some weird stuff with table calcs in the past. Okay, to the point where when you got that answer, you just needed to go take a shower. Right? You just felt dirty. I mean, you just felt that you've done stuff, but you should not be doing it. Okay? At least with include, it's much easier. So I'll explain exactly what it does, right? I mean, what it does is, regardless of your whiz level of detail, it allows you to go a couple of steps underneath it, right? So if I were to take this question, in fact, as I mentioned, table calculations can never achieve it, and even if it does, it's quite crazy. Let's look at an example, right? So imagine I want to build out a view at a country level, and what I want to plot is I want to plot the number of products, total products that I sell in a country, and I also want to plot the total number of products that I have which are unprofitable by by country. Okay? Now, if I were to put all the products in the viz or in the view, then this is a very simple question, right? It's very easy to solve. But if I want to show at the country level and still account for those unprofitable products, here's where include could be really useful. Okay? So let's run through the measures framework now. Now, as you can see, there's a pretty long one. And in the back, can you guys see this? Yeah? Or do I need to magnify it? Okay, good, thank you. So with this one, you start, right? You say, okay, first of all, is that a mixed level of aggregation? Yes or no? Now let me explain what's a mixed level of aggregation. Mixed level of aggregation is, sometimes you need to calculate something at a row level and something at an aggregate of an aggregate level, right? If you're trying to mix all of that in one calculation, then this framework's not going to work that nicely, I'll be honest, right? So what you then need to do is you need to then break that calculation into two separate calculations with fixed level of detail or fixed level of aggregation. Does that make sense? Yeah? So I would do the row level calc separately, and then I would do the other one separately. And then later on, bring the answers together. Okay? All right. So you basically ask yourself, is that a mixed level of aggregation? No? Okay, brilliant. Do I need to do rank or any sort of recursive calculation where I need to look up previous month or previous year or the next month or the next year? The answer is no, I don't need to do that. Okay, do I need the aggregation level the same as the data set granularity? Okay, so does the calculation need to operate at the same row level granularity? The answer is no. I actually just need to do it at a product level, right? So moving forward, does the measure aggregation is it at the same LOD as the viz LOD? Meaning, what I'm calculating, is it the same at what I'm going to have in the view? The answer is no, right? I'm going to have my view at the country level, but my calculation needs to happen at the product level. So then I go forward and I say, okay, is my measure aggregation more granular than viz level of detail? The answer is yes. And we end up on create a level of detail expression. Does that make sense, what I'm doing now? Is everyone sleeping? No. Okay, good. All right, so let's have a look on this one then, right? So this is a simple view where the blue bar is the count of all the products that I sell. For example, in this case, France, I sell 1,328 products, of which 235 are unprofitable, okay? And how did I grab that? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. If I go here and hit edit, you'll see the calculation. So what I'm doing is including the product name for this view, okay? And if the profit was less than 0, then I'm counting that product for my visual. Make sense? Sorry? Can I also replicate this onto that screen? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Wow, that's the only applause I got today. All right, so we're done with include, okay? Brilliant. Let's move on then. What's exclude then? Okay, so this is the other one. With exclude, basically what we're doing is we've got a view, a viz level of detail, but guess what? We don't want to use all the dimensions that are there in play, okay? So we want to take some of them out. And this is where we'd use exclude. Now, I'll be perfectly honest, a lot of times when it's about using exclude, you can get away with table calcs instead, okay? It's just a matter of preference. There are a couple of nuances. I'll talk about that later with some examples. But exclude in general are pretty good when you're trying to, as I said, exclude some dimensions. When you're doing, percentage of total, difference from overall averages, totals or reference line sort of stuff, then exclude is actually pretty good. Okay? Good. Now, on level of detail expressions, a word of caution, okay? They're very, very powerful, but at the same time, when you've created calculations and you add that to your data model and you share that on Tableau server, and then everyone else connects to that data source and then uses them in their visualizations, there is a possibility that you might make them go for a wrong answer. So what I mean by that is with fixed level of detail expressions, for example, right, which is independent to a view, I might have created that at any level. And if I don't make it very clear to my end user, guess what's going to happen? They'll get some number. There is no warning message, which is going to tell them that you're operating at the wrong level of detail, right? So with that comes a bit of responsibility in terms of how you work with level of details and how you organize your work, okay? So what I would suggest is come up with some sort of a standard in terms of how you're going to organize your level of detail and let those end users know that this sales that you're dragging is not the same one as your normal sum of sales. That this particular sales is at a product level, or this particular sales is average at a regional level, right? And you can do it quite easily by the naming convention of that calculation, right? Or by using the describe and comment option. Do you guys know what I mean by describe and comment? No? I see some people saying no. Okay, so let me just quickly show you that because I think it's very important. So with this one, when I hover over it, see I get the name of that calculation, right? Oh, sorry, name of that calculation. So what I can do at times is I can go to describe. I mean, I'm copying the formula right now, but you can do formula plus something else. So I'm just going to copy that and then go to comment, and then paste that. And now when I hover over it, I'm seeing the calculation. So it could be a combination of you show the calculation plus a little description, that use this calculation to do blah, 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 whatever it may be, okay? So at least the end user knows, especially when they're doing web edit on server, these comments are still going to work, right? So they have a bit of transparency there. Okay, make sense? Great. All right, so that's one. Second is organize, your level of detail expressions in a meaningful way. I'm not going to teach you how to organize your laptops in folder. I mean, I throw my files everywhere. I do the same thing with my calculations. But ideally, you should be organizing it nicely so people know what they're using. A lot of customers I see, they create like 3 different folders. And they basically just have like fixed calcs in one folder, include in the other, and exclude in the other, so people know what they're using. Makes sense? It's pretty straightforward, but it's important. All right. And then another best practice I would say is also how you should reconcile your numbers. Now, if you're not used to level of detail expressions, right, they're a bit of a tricky one. What I mean by that is the first view that you're looking at, right? Now, I have the subcategories visible. So I know this 8.84%, how it's coming up, okay? But when I create a level of detail expressions, because I can't see it, it's hard for me to gauge the validity of that number, right? So what I would say is just simply, just drop them side by side, just for reconciliation, right? Again, very obvious thing, but I find it more useful than using a calculator, because I know Tableau better than a calculator. But it's just much easier this way. Okay? All right. Table calculations then. Let's talk about some best practices. Okay, so how many of you get table calculations right the first time? Come on, there's got to be at least one person. Okay, you, very good. You're better than everyone. With table calcs, I mean, there is a possibility that you may need to try a couple of times, before you get the right answer. And the reason for that is most often than not, people start with a visual, right, to start building their table calcs. Now, let's be honest, depending on the type of visual you're working on, you might need to think about it horizontally or vertically, or in certain cases, just all over the place. And it's hard to orient yourself, right, with table across or table down. So what I would say is when you're building your table calcs, okay, firstly, start with a table, just a cross tab, okay? The reason for that is we are all used to Excel spreadsheets, and generally speaking, like we are well accustomed to looking at numbers in a cross-tabular formats, at least to get the numbers right, okay? So what I would say is get it first in a tabular format, and then once you have that, let me find sales, right? So let's get this one in. And this is too big, okay. Okay, so. Okay, all right. So now that you have this number, you can start playing with your table calcs, okay? So let's go here and say add table calculations, and you'll see the window pops up. How many of you have actually noticed this whole highlighting in Tableau when you're building your table calculations? Brilliant. So this actually is the best thing that's happened to table calcs since they were introduced in, I think, version 4 or 5. Okay? Why? Because you can see how they're working. Earlier, it was like a black box, right? You do something, then you come out of it, and I'm like, this is not what I wanted. Then you go back in, then you change a few things, you come back out, and you keep on playing that stupid game. But now, at least you see how these numbers are calculated, right? So I can see that, okay, this is table across, this is table down, this is just across, this is just down, right? Across and then down, right? So it's very, very easy this way to see how these calculations are done, okay? And the best part is, once you know that here's how my number needs to be calculated, what I would say is click on specific dimensions. By the way, before I show that, pay attention to what happens over here, okay, under specific dimensions. See, if I select table down, it's selected category and subcategory. If I do pane down, then it selects just subcategory. If I select pane across, then it selects ship mode, right? So although I'm making relative choices in terms of pane across, pane down, it is preparing the specific dimensions for me, right? So let's say this is what I wanted. I would click on specific dimension and now lock it down to ship mode. Okay? And then when I get out of here, regardless of how I change my view, this looks ugly, this still looks ugly, I don't know what this is. You get the idea. All right, so like for example, I'm free to change the visual whichever way I want, and I don't have to worry about the numbers changing now. Okay? It's very, very simple. Start with a table, see how the calculations are happening, lock it down to those specific dimensions. Okay? Once you've locked it down to specific dimensions, then feel free to change the visual whichever way you want. Okay? In fact, feel free to either remove something out of this visual or in fact introduce a new dimension as well, and your numbers will stay the same. Cool? Right. Great. So that was the demo. Now, a use case for table calculations, which you'll never really be able to achieve with level of detail expressions. So if there is one thing that level of detail expressions can definitely not do, and table calculations are the only answer, those are the recursive table calcs, right? So for example, if you're trying to do a moving average of sum of sales on a weekly basis, that's where you would use a table calc, right? So if I were to run through this framework, this one's pretty straightforward, right? Do I need a recursive calc? The answer is yes. Okay, great. Go ahead and do a table calc. So why do I need a table calc? It's because table calc allows you, so where's my T2? Okay, to do things like this, right? Where you can look up 3 previous periods, and then you can look at, one forward period and do a calculation. This could be lookups as well, right? So you can do a lookup of your own value or previous 3 values or the first values, right? That is very, very powerful, and it's only available with table calcs. Okay? All right. What else can I use table calcs? So let's say that you want to create a view where we're going to show average sales across regions by category. Okay? And we want to show both the dimensions. So we want to show regions as well as we want to show the categories. Okay? So in this case, if I do run through this framework, it's going to be a long process, right? But hopefully it'll all make sense. So if I were to focus here, is the aggregation same as data set granularity? The answer is no. It's actually on a more aggregated level. Is the measure aggregation the same level of detail as the viz? The answer is no. Moving forward, is the measure aggregation more granular than viz level of detail? The answer is no, right? And do I just need one value or mark? The answer is no. Why? Because I need the region as well as the category, right? So I need the value to repeat multiple times. So it says, okay, go ahead and use a table calc instead. Right? Now you can also use a level of detail expression here. So you can use an exclude calculation as well, or a table calc. Okay. So let's go into that one. With this one, you can see that here's the number. So window average sum sales, that's the table calc that we've created. It's 259,701. I could get the same result by just putting a trend line as well. So I could just simply drag that. I think a lot of times it's just more of a visual choice in terms of how you want that answer to be represented, right? So sometimes you might just want to throw a trend line. That's the easiest. You don't need to write anything. But the other times you might want to actually build a calculation like this. Okay. With me so far? So everyone who's awake is nodding. That's good. All right. Now, the same question, right? But this time, let's say I don't want to see the regions, right? So like earlier I had it repeating, right, by regions. So repeating summary values. This time, let's say that I don't want to see the regions. Just give me the average sales across regions by category at the category level. Okay? So these are the sort of summaries that you typically create and put it on top of the dashboard, right? High-level numbers. So if this is what you're trying to achieve, then in this case, the same all the way till the end point. But in this case, when it says, does the result need just one mark or value? The answer is yes. So we're going to create a level of detail expression. Okay? How do we do that? It's pretty straightforward. So this is what I meant by summary values. Okay? So these are the averages across regions. Okay? But I don't have it repeating by region. Right? The way that we did it is very simple. Right? So if I go here and show you that it's a fixed calculation at the region and category level, and I'm doing sum of sales. Cool? I'm going to take your silence as a yes. All right. So depending on what your question is and what you're trying to visualize, I hope that this framework is going to allow you to pick the right calculation type. Okay? I'll be honest, it comes with a bit of practice as well. But once you basically get a hang of it, it will be much easier for you to decide which is the right option. Okay. Now, it's not just about the implications in terms of the answer that you get or how your visual looks, depending on what calculation type you pick. The implications are also in terms of filters. Okay? So here's a little concept for you all. It's the Tableau filter order, or the order of operations. What I mean by that is when you just simply drag and drop something onto the canvas and apply a filter, it's very easy, right? But behind the scene, there's a lot going on. There's a whole pipeline, okay? And in that pipeline, things are happening at different stages, or there are multiple steps associated with it, okay? So just from a filter standpoint, these are all the different types of filter that you have in Tableau, okay? Now, they happen in a specific sequence. So for example, extract filters will be evaluated first, then the data source filter, then the context filters, then all the fixed expressions that you have, they'll be evaluated, then the dimensions filters, and so on. Okay? So they happen in this specific sequence. Now, you might say, why do I care? Right? I mean, why is it important to me? Well, it's kind of important. And the reason for that is, depending on the type of calculation you have and the filters that you're using, your numbers may change and your numbers may vary as well. Okay? So let's actually just have a quick look at that one. Okay? So going into Tableau, let's open this view. Sorry? The previous slide? Yeah. Oh, this one? Yeah. That, I think we should discuss after the session, if you don't mind. Because that, I will have to explain you how level of detail expressions work. And that's just a longer conversation. But happy to do so right after the session. Okay, so this is a very simple view, right, with two filters. So this first one is calculated using level of detail expression. So what it is percentage of total sales. Very simple, okay? So what this means is bookcases is 12.37% of the total sales we've had. All right, simple as that. And then I've got the same number, but this one we've derived it using a table calc. Okay, so 12.37% using table calc, same answer. Now see what happens when I change this filter. So I'm going to deselect furniture. Now I'm going to deselect office supplies. The numbers stay the same. Nothing changed, so you didn't actually have to pay attention. That was a trick one. So why did the numbers stay the same? Trust me, it's a trickier question than you think. So the reason for that is where things get calculated, okay? So with the fixed expressions, okay, they were already calculated here, okay? And then when I was changing my table calc filters, because they were already calculated beforehand, my level of detail numbers, they didn't get affected. Does it make sense? Because I'd already taken care of that beforehand, right? So now if I go down the pipeline and apply a filter, the previous things are unaffected. Yeah? Okay. Now let's look at another example. Now this time, do pay attention because the numbers are going to change, okay? So let's actually focus on bookcases, okay? Let me remove consumer. Do you see now this one changes? Let me deselect corporate. Again, this one changes. So when I deselect segments, the table calc changes. The level of detail number stays the same. Okay? So what's going on here? Well, what's going on is if I were to look at dimension filter, the dimension filter is after fixed expression. Okay, so I've already calculated my fixed. Number. Okay, so now when I change dimension, that number doesn't change. Make sense? Okay, but table calcs are all the way down. So that's why my table calc number changes. Does it make sense? Right? It's all about where things are happening in a pipeline. Cool? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see the LOD calc for this one. So it's just pretty simple. What we're doing is, this is the numerator. So numerator, we're calculating the sum of sales at subcategory and category level, and then the sum of sales going across the whole data set. Okay? All right, one more example. So for this one, let's look at fixed versus include, exclude numbers, okay? So focus on central region. You can see that all the numbers are the same. Okay? Now let's see what happens when I deselect first class. My numbers change for exclude and include. They don't change for fixed. Right? And the reason for that is because when I'm here, include and exclude are evaluated after the dimension filters. So when I change my dimension, it changes the numbers for my include and exclude calculations. Make sense? Good. All right. So moving on to other advantages of using LOD expressions at times. Yes? Oh, that is such a long conversation. Why do they happen in a specific sequence? Why dimension before a measure? I can't think of an example right now, but if you give me time, I'll come up with an example. The reason is the way we want to show our results. At times, when you have context filters and when you're doing filtering on it, especially with user filters, it's important to have that specific sequence maintained. But I can think of a good example after the session and discuss that in detail with you, if you don't mind. Yeah. OK, so with LOD expressions, I said, right, if you're using fixed, they're like a first-class dimension in Tableau world. Okay? And the advantage to that is now you can use them in action filters. Okay? Or you can take those dimensions, which are the result of a fixed level of detail expression, and create global filters out of it. Okay? Now that's really, really powerful. And the advantage to that is the scope is not just the sheet, right? It's across the workbook and at the data source level. So if I were to show you that, if you look at this one, right? So let's go here. This number of orders per customer. Okay, so where's my L2? Actually, let's see. This is a derived field, right? So I'm counting per customer how many orders did they place, right? And I'm creating a histogram of that count. Okay? So even with this histogram, these numbers are first-class dimensions in Tableau, right? So I can click on, let's say, customers with 6 orders, right? And then it'll filter the rest of the view. Okay? Or I can have this filter, which is, again, a quick filter. I can just simply filter it down like that and update the whole view. And this is level of detail expression creating a dimension for you. Okay? Right. Now, some considerations. So we've looked into some basics. We've looked into what level of detail expressions are, some best practices around it, table calcs, and then some just broader considerations to worry about. Okay? So performance is a big thing. Okay? How do LODs work? So LODs are typically part of your query. So think about Tableau generating a nested query, okay, and sending it back to your database. Now, if your database is slow to begin with, you know what's going to happen, right? When you send in all these nested queries, suddenly things are not going to get fast. In fact, the performance might be pretty slow. Okay? If that is the case, you might want to consider replacing it with table calcs when possible. Right? Also, because we're sending nested queries back, and it's dependent on the query performance on the database, join culling actually has a heavy impact on the performance. So what I mean by that is, if we can leverage join culling, meaning if you got referential integrity in your database, right, or if you specify in Tableau, assume referential integrity, okay, Tableau will be able to apply join culling, and what that means is it'll be able to drop out unnecessary tables out of that query, and in turn have faster performance on your data. Okay, so those are the main ones when it comes to LOD expressions. With table calculations, the way it works is Tableau fires a query to your database, brings the result set back into Tableau, and then does those calculations locally in Tableau. Right? Now, what that means is if you're bringing back a massive query result set back into Tableau, and then locally, let's say on a commodity piece of hardware, you're trying to do computation on your machine, right, locally, that might be slow if the result set is pretty big. Okay? Now, in that case, what we want to do is we want to do the opposite of we would have done to the slow level of detail expressions, right? So in this case, instead, how about we convert them into a level of detail expression instead and let the database do that work instead of Tableau doing the work locally on our machines. Does that make sense? That's good. Also, when using table calcs, and let's consider a possibility that we can't actually offload this work to the database with LOD expressions. Try using an aggregated data extracts, right? That should hopefully speed up things for us in Tableau as well. Finally, there are some advantages and disadvantages in terms of flexibility of both the different approaches. Like for example, when you use table calcs, right? You can just use table down, table across, pane down, across and then down, right? That could be quite powerful if you think about it, because it's like relative referencing, right? So if I introduce something, it automatically adjusts. Can be quite confusing at times as well, but depending on the situation, that could be quite flexible. Whereas with LOD expressions, you are specifying dimensions in the calculation itself, right? So in some ways, it's kind of rigid, right? Because you have to manually specify those dimensions. And also another thing to keep in mind, as I said, when you used fixed level of detail expression especially, most of the filters are ignored, as you saw, right? When we are using the filters, most of the filters are ignored, except for if you're using context, data source, or extract filters. Okay? Good. So, what are the takeaways? There are multiple ways of getting to the same number. Now, I'll be honest, I come from pre-Table Calc era in Tableau. And then when Table Calcs were introduced, it was amazing, right? I was so amazed. And I spent a lot of time becoming really good at it. And then when I became good at it, guess what happened? We had LOD expressions. Now I'm trying to get you good at LOD expressions, but I still have that stickiness to Table Calcs. So my creativity involves first going by default to Table Calcs. And if that not, then I go for level of detail expressions, right? Now, this is a habit which I'm trying to break, okay? So ideally, in your case, if you're in the same boat as me, try using the calculation framework, right? If there is one takeaway today that I would like you to have, is this calculation framework on dimensions as well as measures, right? Try for yourself, see how that works out for you, right? I'll share with you my contact details, right? If you got any advice in terms of how we can improve that framework, please feel free to reach out. I'll be more than happy to make those changes. Also, depending on what you pick, right? I mean, it's got implications on your data model. So I said, if you got loads of LOD expressions, they're all part of your data model. Guess what? That could be confusing if you don't make it clear to the end user what those calculations are. Filtering is one of the implication, right? So depending on if you pick fixed or if you use Table Calc or include exclude, filtering will have different answers coming. And of course, performance, a very, very, very important aspect of everything that we do in Tableau, right? Because oftentimes when we talk about performance, it's usually published onto the server, and then we complain that something's slow, right? Let's be honest, it's probably too late by then. Why don't we consider performance at the time we're about to start writing a calculation, right? It's important. And finally, all of this that I've talked about today is valid for today, right? We are constantly making changes to the product. We are adding new functionalities. So as you know, level of detail expressions is a relatively new feature in Tableau. So you could expect new improvements coming down the line. So I would just say, just keep abreast with all the improvements that are going to be in the new releases. Okay. With that, for survey, I'm sure you're going to give 5. I mean, why not? It's just a good thing to do, karma points. But no, really, please provide comments. They're very, very important, right? And what I'll do now is just share with you my contact details, right? So if you got any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. It's mshridhar@tableau.com. As I said, I work out of our London offices. So while you sleep, I can take care of that answer. Right? So with that, thank you, everyone. I'll stick around here for any questions that you may have. Right? And if I get kicked out, I'll be outside that door. You can take more questions there as well. Thank you and have a good. Oh yeah, today's the party day. Enjoy. It's a lot of fun.